Yeah, we back. Yeah, we back. Now, today we're going to be talking about Malcolm X's daughter has filed a lawsuit against the American government for their role in the death of her father. And I'm also going to be doing an historical examination of several black men throughout history who have been targeted for assassination and elimination. Now, this is going to be an emotional video for me because obviously we're going to be talking about, many of our legendary forefathers who were targeted for destruction by our enemies. And it's crazy because throughout history, black men have been vilified and negatively stereotyped by European society. For many centuries now, and still to this day, black men are stereotyped as savage and criminal and, any negative stereotype and attribute you want to throw on our names, right? But every time we get black men who stand on honor and integrity and principle, who love their people, who love their women, who love their race, every time we get a legendary black man who destroys those lies, who eliminates those stereotypes, every time we get a black man who unapologetically defends the honor and dignity of his people, he is targeted for elimination, incarceration, assassination, etc., etc. So today's video is going to be an emotional one for me, but not wasting no time, let's jump straight into the article. As you can see, take a look up on the screen. Malcolm X's family files a $100 million lawsuit and claims cover-up of his murder. Let's jump straight into it. The family of Malcolm X, who was assassinated in 1965, has filed a $100 million lawsuit against the U.S. government, announced Friday. Malcolm X's daughter, who represented the family at a New York City press conference, and her lawyers claim that they have uncovered new evidence they believe will prove the NYPD and the FBI conspired to kill Malcolm X. According to the complaint, Mustafa Hassan, a witness to Malcolm X's killing, revealed that when he and others tried to apprehend one of the shooters, it appeared to him that the NYPD officers at the scene helped the shooter escape. Lawyers representing the family have said that the authorities never bothered to take a statement from Hassan, even though it was allegedly clear that he was present during the assassination, implying that law enforcement willfully neglected to conduct a proper investigation. Lawyers said that a New York FBI special agent sent a letter to J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director at the time, in December 1964, calling for extra surveillance of Malcolm X's activities, since Malcolm allegedly intended to have the oppression of black Americans brought before the United Nations, and about 2 months later, he was assassinated. Now, let's talk about it, man. One thing we don't really talk about is the amount of black women who have suffered throughout the past few centuries, who have had to witness their husbands, their fathers, their brothers, their loved ones be targeted and eliminated simply due to the fact that they were standing up for the honor and dignity and prosperity of their people, simply due to the fact that they were standing up and doing what was right as a man. I don't think we go into detail about that, especially when we talk about the black family. I don't think we talk about how many black families were destroyed simply because the man who was the head of that family was simply standing on business, right? How many women have been left widows? How many daughters have been left fatherless? These are things we don't talk about, right? The vast majority of our great black men over the past few centuries have been targeted for murder. And even in the case of Malcolm X and his daughter bringing this lawsuit against the U.S. government, not only was her father killed by the white power structure, but also her grandfather, who was Malcolm's father, Earl Little, was also targeted for murder. As we all know, like I've been talking about on my channel, Malcolm X grew up in a Garveyite family. His parents, his mother and his father, were high-ranking members of Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, the UNIA. And simply due to the fact that he was a black man who loved his people, who was preaching a gospel of liberation and black empowerment and self-reliance, Malcolm X's father, just like himself, was targeted by the power structure. He was targeted for elimination. He was targeted for assassination. And it is said that Malcolm X's father was murdered by the Black Legion, which was a white supremacist private military terrorist organization that was active in the Midwest in the early 1900s. And from that assassination, Malcolm X was left without a father. He was left fatherless, right? And his mother lost her mind. I believe that she was admitted into a mental hospital for like 30, 40 years. That black woman lost her mind. She went crazy. She lost her mind. And that was not the first time they were targeted by white supremacist elements. There were many times where they had to skip town and leave town and relocate because they were being terrorized in whatever town they relocated to. The Ku Klux Klan, the Black Legion, whatever private military white supremacist terrorist organization was active in the region, they would target that family simply due to the fact that they were working on behalf of their people, right? So eventually, Malcolm X's father was killed and Malcolm X's mother lost her mind and she ended up in a mental hospital. Now, in today's video, I'm going to be doing a short list, kind of paying homage and showing respect to black men throughout history who have suffered a similar fate for similar reasons. Another black man that comes to mind is Fred Hampton. Now, the Fred Hampton story is crazy because he was active in his late teens, early 20s. I believe he was killed at 21 years old. So, this is a very, young, bright black man that was destined for great things. But unfortunately, his light was cut short. As you already know, high-ranking member of the Black Panther Party in the 1960s, and under his leadership in the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party, there were medical clinics established, free breakfast programs for children, and even at the young age of 21 years old, he was already, destined for greatness. He already showed characteristics of leadership, and he was deemed as a national security risk by the FBI, by J. Edgar Hoover, the same exact person who took down Marcus Garvey decades before. And I believe it was in December 1969, the FBI, in collaboration with the local Chicago police, had broke into his home at like 4 a.m. and fired like 100 bullets into his apartment and killed him at point blank range while he was sleeping in bed with his woman. And I believe his wife was 19 years old and almost 9 months pregnant. And the white man bust through the door, let off 100 shots, for what? Just because the black man loved his people. Just because the black man loved his people. Crazy. And to add insult to injury, after they assassinated her husband, the father of her child, they handcuffed her and escorted her out of the building with the gun pressed to her pregnant belly, right? So not only did they kill her man, but then they put a gun to her belly as they escorted her off the premises. And if you take a look up on the screen, you'll see right here the authorities carrying out the dead body of Fred Hampton after the operation. And just like in the case of Malcolm X, another woman has been left as a widow, and another child has been left without a father. Now, let's continue. Let's talk about Medgar Evers, black man from the deep South, came up during Jim Crow, served in World War II, and when he came back from serving in the military, he got involved in the NAACP, the civil rights movement, actively and directly challenging the power structure at the time. And unfortunately, because of his work, he was murdered. He was shot dead in the street. Take a look up on the screen. Medgar Evers lived with the constant threat of death. A large white supremacist population and the Ku Klux Klan were present in Jackson, Mississippi and the suburbs. The risk was so high that before his death, Evers and his wife, Merle, had trained their children on what to do in the case of a shooting, bombing, or any kind of attack on their lives. Evers, who was regularly followed home by 2 FBI cars and a police car, arrived at his home on the morning of his death without an escort. None of his usual protection was present, for reasons unspecified by the FBI or the police. There has been speculation that many members of the police at the time were members of the Ku Klux Klan. Emerging from his car and carrying NAACP t-shirts that read "Jim Crow Must Go," Medgar Evers was struck in the back with a bullet fired by an Eddystone Enfield 1917 rifle. The bullet passed through his heart. Initially thrown to the ground by the impact of the shot, Medgar Evers rose and staggered 30 feet before collapsing outside his front door. His wife, Merle, was the first to find him. Now, unfortunately, as you can see, another woman left as a widow, and more children left without a father, simply due to the fact that they were doing what was right as men. They were performing their duty as men. And simply due to the arrogance and the greed of our enemies, they believed that Medgar Evers was better off dead simply because he had the audacity to stand up for his people. And it's crazy because Medgar Evers was a military veteran, right? He served in the white man's military, sacrificed his life for the country. And this is how they repaid him when he came back home from service. Now, take a look up on the screen. This is the cockroach that killed Medgar Evers. This is the cockroach that was responsible for his murder. This who the divestors be talking about. I'm saying, oh yeah, this who the divestors be glorifying over here. Ugly cockroaches like this. Now, let's continue. Next up, we're going to talk about Nat Turner. Yeah, Nat Turner. The black man who orchestrated the most famous rebellion in the history of the United States of America. Obviously, I'm sure many of us are familiar with the story of Nat Turner and his group of armed men who went plantation to plantation, estate to estate, destroying the enemy, right? Unfortunately, due to the fact that our good brother was standing on business and standing on honor and integrity, he was targeted for elimination. Take a look up on the screen. Nat Turner was tried on November 5th, 1831 for conspiring to rebel and make insurrection, and was convicted and sentenced to death. And yes, just like in the story of Malcolm X, just like in the story of Malcolm X's father, just like in the story of Medgar Evers and Fred Hampton, another black woman left as a widow, right? We never talk about how many great black men were snatched away from black women throughout history, right? We never talk about that. We never talk about how many black women had an amazing black man, and for no reason at all, he was snatched away from her. Now let's continue. Next up, we're gonna talk about Denmark Vesey. Yeah, shout out to Denmark Vesey, one of my favorites. Let's get into it. Take a look up on the screen. The Denmark Vesey insurrection, which was planned to take place on the 14th of July, 1822, became known to thousands of blacks throughout Charleston, South Carolina, and along the Carolina coast. The plot called for Vesey and his group of enslaved people and free blacks to execute their enslavers and temporarily liberate the city of Charleston. Vesey and his followers planned to sail to Haiti to escape retaliation. 2 enslaved men opposed to Vesey's scheme leaked the plot. Charleston authorities charged 131 men with conspiracy. In total, 67 men were convicted and 35 were hanged, including Denmark Vesey. Now that's crazy, man. Denmark Vesey back in the 1820s. Back in the 1820s, man, he was like, listen, man, we're going to kill these folks and we're going to hop on a boat and go to Haiti. Our brothers down in Haiti, they going to hold us down. You feel me? That goes to show you, our forefathers already knew what time it was. They already know unity is the key to prosperity. Now let's continue. Next up, we're going to talk about Delon Kamati. Delon Kamati, the big dog out of East Africa, the big chief out of East Africa. Take a look up on the screen. Delon Kamati was a rebel field marshal fighting the British colonial authorities in Kenya during the Mau Mau Rebellion in the 1950s. The violent rebellion remains a controversial part of Kenyan and British history. The rebellion instigated the creation of a system of detention camps, which saw the incarceration of 80,000 Kikuyu people in Kenya. In the early morning of February 18, 1957, he was executed by hanging at a maximum security prison. He was buried in an unmarked grave. Now, of course, like I mentioned before, another black woman left as a widow. And I'm not sure if he had children, but if he did, then more children left without fathers. And I believe that his wife was actively, part of the rebellion right alongside with him, fighting against the British colonial authorities, It's sad stuff, bro. It's sad stuff. Like I said, this is a common narrative of the black man, whenever we get one of the great ones, for whatever reason, man, our enemies want to exterminate them. But anyway, let's continue. Next up, we're going to talk about Steve Biko, prominent black man from South Africa, fighting against the apartheid regime. Now, I know we like to crack jokes on the South Africans in modern day, but, back in the day, they were standing on black business. Now, when it comes to Steve Biko, I would say that, unlike some of the other guys that I mentioned before, like a Delon Kamati, Steve Biko didn't physically wage war with the gun or the sword, but he was more so focused on psychological liberation, right? Because before you could physically liberate yourself, you got to psychologically escape the chains of internalized self-hatred and things like that. So he focused on, organizing, writing pamphlets and books to, galvanize his people, organizing around the black majority of South Africa to reject the structure and system of apartheid. And unfortunately, because of his influence that he was able to obtain, I believe that a lot of his books, a lot of his work was banned by the government, right? Even his movement was restricted, right? So he couldn't even move around freely. He couldn't really do public engagements. He couldn't really, disseminate his information. And unfortunately, his life ended violently. And I believe he was beaten to death by the state police. Now, next up, we're going to talk about Zumi Palmares. Legendary black man who was active during the 1600s, right? We taking it back to the 1600s in colonial Brazil. Quilombola dos Palmares was a self-sustaining kingdom of Maroons who escaped from the Portuguese settlements in Brazil, a region the size of Portugal in the hinterlands. At its height, Palmares had a population of more than 30,000 and developed into a confederation of 11 towns spanning rugged mountainous terrain in frontier zones across the present-day states of Alagoas and Pernambuco. Palmares was an autonomous state based on African political and religious customs that supported itself through agriculture, fishing, hunting, gathering, trading, and raiding plantations and settlements. In 1694, 15 years after Zumi assumed the kingship of Palmares, the Portuguese colonists under the military commanders launched an assault on Palmares. They made use of artillery as well as a fierce force of Brazilian Indian fighters, which took 42 days to defeat the kingdom. On February 6, 1694, after 67 years of conflict with the Maroons of Palmares, the Portuguese succeeded in destroying the kingdom's central settlement. Some resistance continued, but in 1695, Zumi was killed and decapitated. His head was displayed on a pike to dispel any legends of his immortality. Man, listen, you could drop the timeline at any time in history, and I guarantee, man, it's gonna be some Europeans hating on the black man, bro. I'm telling you. It's 3 things guaranteed in life: death, taxes, and the European hating on the black man. Let's continue. Next up, we're gonna talk about Charles Delon. Yeah, Charles Delon. Take a look up on the screen. Charles Delon was an African-American revolutionary who was one of the leaders of the 1811 German Coast Uprising, a slave revolt that began on January 8, 1811 in the territory of Orleans. He led more than 500 rebels against the plantations on the Mississippi River towards New Orleans. Now, his origins are disputed, right? Some sources say that he originally came from the island of Saint-Domingue in present-day Haiti, but I believe that he was born in the year, when was he born? 1789, and the Haitian Revolution began in 1791. So if he was in the island of Saint-Domingue during that time, he would have been 2 years old. He would have been a 2-year-old child when the Haitian Revolution popped off, right? But in 1811, during the German Coast Uprising, which he led, he would have been 22 years old, right? 22 years old, leading a rebellion of 500 armed men, you know? So whether he came from Louisiana or the island of Saint-Domingue, it don't really matter. But like I said, 22 years old, you know, marching, you know, leading the charge, man. Shout out to Charles Delon, one of our bright young lights that was unfortunately cut short. Take a look up on the screen. Delon was among the first captured by dogs after the battle. The militia did not hold him for trial or interrogation. Samuel Hamilton described Delon's fate. Charles Delon had his hands chopped off, and then he was shot in the thigh and in the other until they were both broken. Then he was shot in the body, and before he died, he was put into a bundle of straw and roasted. His dying cry sent a message to the other escaped enslaved people in the marshes. You know, rest in peace, man. Rest in peace, big homie. Let's continue. Next, we're going to talk about Samuel Sharpe. Yeah, Samuel Sharpe. Let's get into it. When Sharpe was just 31 years old, he instigated a plan of passive resistance, a general strike against slavery. The plan was that the enslaved would refuse to work after the Christmas holiday in 1831. They would continue to strike until the state owners and managers listened to their grievances. Sharpe felt that the owners might listen to the enslaved, as the strike was time for the key sugarcane harvest, and if the ripe cane was not cut, then it would be ruined. Sharpe hoped to inspire a peaceful resistance. Indeed, he encouraged the enslaved to only fight physically if the managers did not agree to their demands. Yet Sharpe probably knew that their strike would not succeed, and he made military preparations for the rebellion. Sharpe's strike did not go according to the initial plan of passive but firm resistance. On December 28, 1831, when the British militia marched on the protesters, the Kensington Estate Great House was set on fire. The rebellion lasted 8 days and cost the lives of 186 enslaved and 14 white overseers and planters. Over 500 slaves were convicted of participating in the rebellion. Many were hanged and their heads were severed and placed around the plantations as a warning against future rebellions. Those who escaped the death penalty were treated brutally. Now, I can keep going, man. This could be an hours long video, right? But one thing is for certain, man. One thing is for sure that we've established, definitely when it comes to at least recent history, there's one undeniable truth. The greatest black men, our brightest black men, our most amazing black men, our most principled black men have been targeted for elimination. Whether it was by murder, physical assassination, whether it was by incarceration, whether, whatever it may be, right? The power structure has sought to destroy these men who dare to stand on business for their people, right? We spoke about Nat Turner, Malcolm X, Fred Hampton, Steve Biko, Medgar Evers, Delon, Zumi, Palmares, the list goes on, Samuel Sharpe. right? These are men who lived in different time periods, different centuries, different walks of life, come from different backgrounds, but they all had one thing in common. They loved their people. They loved their people, man. And because of the fact that they loved their people, our enemies decided that they were better off dead. These men were not criminals. These men were not terrorists. These men were simply protectors of their people. And it should not be a crime to protect your people. It shouldn't be a crime to love your people. It shouldn't be a crime to defend your people. But anyways, let's continue, right? Next up, we got Tusa Lur, right? As we all know, legendary black man, one of our best political minds that the black race has ever produced. Sparked off one of the greatest moments in black history ever, right? The Haitian Revolution. And unfortunately, like many of the great black men that we mentioned before, Tusa Lur, he was assassinated by our enemies. He was captured, he was locked up, he was incarcerated, and he died in prison. And what was his crime? His crime was simply due to the fact that he was protecting his people. He was defending his people. He was loving his people. And similar to the men that I mentioned before, another black woman was left as a widow, and children were left without a father. Take a look up on the screen. Napoleon Bonaparte sent General Charles Leclerc to apprehend Tusa Lur and deport him to the French Alps. Suzanne, his wife, and her children were transported to Bayonne, where they were placed under the supervision of General Ducos. She was tortured, but never provided any information about her husband. One source says when she arrived in prison, she weighed 250 pounds. She only weighed 90 pounds when leaving France. During all the years of torture, she gave a single answer: I will not talk about my husband's business with his torturers. Man, shout out to Tusa Lur's wife, man. Shout out to Tusa Lur's wife, man. When the enemy had her in captivity, she said, I will never divulge information when it comes to my husband. I will never speak candidly to my husband's enemies. I'd rather die. Man, shout out to Suzanne Louverture, man. Shout out to Queen Mother Suzanne Baptiste Louverture. Let's continue. Next up, we're going to talk about Christophe. We're going to talk about King Henry Christophe. Now, Christophe's story is a little different because it was not him that was assassinated, right? It was actually his son, his 11-year-old son. Unfortunately, due to the fact that the French were unable to get to Christophe, they were unable to kill Christophe, they decided instead to kill his 11-year-old son that they had in captivity. And they used him as kind of like a hostage to, during negotiations back in 1805. Like they told him, we got your son, if you don't capitulate, we're going to kill your son. And Christophe, being the black man that he was, Christophe, a black man of unshakable, impregnable character, even with his firstborn son held hostage by his foreign enemies, by his French enemies, by his European enemies, he still never broke. He still never broke character. He still never capitulated to their demands. And unfortunately, because of that fact, his firstborn son, Francois Ferdinand Christophe, was killed. And to be honest, still to this day, nobody knows where he was buried. Nobody even knows what they did with the body, right? Nobody knows what happened. He died under very mysterious circumstances. Some sources say he was poisoned. Some say that he was killed. Nobody really knows what happened. Nobody knows what happened to Christophe's firstborn son in France, man. Nobody knows what they did to that 11-year-old black child. Still to this day, bro, nobody knows where is the body of Francois Ferdinand Christophe, bro. Where is the body? Now, even still, after the death of his firstborn son, Christophe went on to establish his own sovereign government, established one of the largest and most formidable standing armies in the history of the black race, equipped with a navy, artillery, and infantry. And then he went on to become one of the most powerful and wealthy black men walking the face of the earth. But that came after the heartbreak of losing his firstborn son at the hands of the French colonists. So in the case of Christophe, because they couldn't get to him in the same way they got to, Toussaint, they ended up killing his firstborn son instead. And it's not like they didn't try to kill him. I believe during the revolution, during the war, I believe in 1803 or 1802, the French general Rochambeau had actually placed a bounty on Christophe's head, basically saying that anybody who could deliver Christophe's head to him in the capital, he has a large bag of money for you. Now, unfortunately for the French, they couldn't get him. They couldn't get to Christophe, but they got to his son instead. And of course, Christophe's wife had to deal with the heartbreak and the tragedy of losing her firstborn son. Of course, they went on to have more children and have another son, but still, losing a firstborn son, that's not something. It's not something light, especially losing your firstborn son violently at the hands of your European enemies. I'm sure it was a heartbreaking tragedy. But yeah, man, like I said, I could keep going, man, but I don't want the video to be too long. But you notice a pattern, like I said, our greatest black men, this is what they had to go through. This is what they had to go through over the course of history. And can you believe, brothers, Can you believe that in the 21st century, you got women talking about, girl, it's time to get a white man? Crazy, bro. Crazy, bro. Crazy. The black man has been the only man who has stood on integrity and made the ultimate sacrifices for the black woman. And the white man has been the only man trying to destroy that at every single turn. And can you believe some of these women turn around and talk about, it's time to get a white man? Crazy, my dude. Crazy. Anyways, man, it's your boy Nefergard. That's a lane back in the belly. Yes, indeed. Cash app in the description. Support the channel, man. Support the album. Peace.
No. Feel like I'm 75. Know that your team be full of them traders. You know that can never be mine. I'm grabbing a thought when I drive. I'm back in my zone and we on. She said that she ready to come be my wife, yeah, hoping I don't do her wrong. I gave her my word and it's bond. I'm whipping the best like a lamb. I mean no chicken and lamb. Accustomed to call me the man. I never be up on the gram. I'm keeping that way undercover. She want me to tell her I love her. I told her I'm breaking the rules. I told her we making the news. Back in my city they loving me. Standing alone I'm 100 deep. Enemy plotting and still in reach. They try to make sure that we underneath. Trying to make sure that we never make it. Coming for power, come get acquainted. Coming for everything that I wanted. Feeling like Drake, but I really wrote it. Feeling like Kendrick, I'm checking names. Gotta roll up while I go insane. Got so much stress, I been gained weight. Stuffing these racks in this Louis case. One thing for certain, I'm about to check. Keep it 100 and nothing less. Stick with the family since day one. Had to stay down till my day come. Had to stay down, but I'm never patient. Hop on the mic and I'm motivated. Hop on the mic and I drop a classic. Haters can't see me, they copping glasses. Back in the studio making magic. Got a new tape and it's in production. Back on my business, I got a budget. Staying low key when I'm out in public. Feel like I'm 75. Know that your team be full of them traders. You know that can never be mine. I'm grabbing a thought when I drive. I'm back in my zone and we on. She said that she ready to come be my wife, yeah, hoping I don't do her wrong. I gave her my word and it's bond. I'm whipping the best like a lamb. I mean no chicken and lamb. Accustomed to call me the man. I never be up on the gram. I'm keeping that way undercover. She want me to tell her I love her. I told her I'm breaking the rules. I told her we making the news. Making the news. Making the news. Breaking the rules. Yeah, yeah. Know that we making the news. Yeah.